Hey guys, welcome back to Crude Acts, Who Killed Debbie and Sandy. We're on episode 9 of our series, which is a deep dive into a cold case from 1985, and it occurred in Baytown, Texas. Our last episode was a very special Hurricane Barrel episode, where we dug deep into the drug smuggling that was occurring in the area around the time of the case and how connected the activity has been to politicians and law enforcement. I did that to provide some context as to how deep the illegal narcotics industry goes, how it doesn't stop with just the outlaws or the illegals. It's not as simple as deducing it to a war with sides that are defined. Good guys versus bad guys. There's a whole lot of ugly middle that, like with all wars, is messy and muddy with people who serve and profit from both sides. I'm going to dig a little more into that in this episode, but I'm cautious to keep an eye on the purpose of what we're doing here. Our purpose here is to figure out two major things. To figure out what happened on November 15th, 1985, and who it was that killed Debbie Merritt and Sandy Terrell. And then, of course, the other thing. Why has this cold case remained buried in the big thicket, if you will, Chambers County, for such a long time? Why have none of the leads been followed up on? Why have the details surrounding the case become such a secret? All of the things I have shared with you thus far in past episodes is an attempt to reduce the questions down to answers. As each story, each interview, each piece of the puzzle comes together, the case becomes clearer. So, with that in mind, I'm going to add another story to the mix. And this one is a bit of a controversial one. It has caused to this day a slew of issues between my dad, Paul Schaefer, and the current investigators at Chambers County Sheriff's Office, including the sheriff himself, Brian Hawthorne. With that story as a springboard, I'm going to dig a little deeper into the big thicket secrets, which is perhaps why CCSO refuses to solve this cold case. With each deep dive into the gulf of unanswered questions, we'll come back up with a fistful of answers. So let's dive on in and see what we can find. We have a lot to go over, so here we go. My name is Jen Schaefer, and this is Crude Acts, Who Killed Debbie and Sandy, Part 9. As I stated, I'm going to start this off with a story that I want to tell you. Disclaimer alert. Keep in mind, this is a he said, she said story, and all the information I provide here is alleged, and I do say that for legal reasons, because, like I said, both sides of it are saying what they say, and who knows who is right in the end but those two people. But here goes the story. It's 2018. My dad was at the doctor's office, the cardiologist to be exact. They called out his name for him to come up there to sign some paperwork. He did. When he sat back down, a woman, seemingly in her late 30s, early 40s, she asked him, "Hey, are you the Paul Schaefer who was a detective back in the 80s who worked on a case about 2 murdered women?" He responded with a yes, and after he did, she gave him her number and asked him to call her. She had some information about the case. So later that evening, he called her, and the story she told him went something like this. It was the mid-1980s. She said she was a preteen at the time. She remembered overhearing a phone conversation between her mother and someone she couldn't identify. She said on this call, her mother was freaked out and frantic. about a murder that occurred. 2 women who were at the time only considered missing. On the call, they were trying to figure out what they were going to do. And there's also something else. There was a mention of a 55-gallon oil drum of cocaine that was either purchased by or landed in the hands of someone who shouldn't have had it. My dad recorded the conversation, and he sent it off to the Texas Rangers and also to David Maxwell, who was no longer with the Rangers at that time. He took the information to a man named Ron Moser, who is a retired Baytown police officer. He worked on narcotics cases with the DEA and specifically with Agent Roger Norman. One of those investigations was an undercover investigation that took place at a marine transport location on Bayway Drive, which involved cocaine being smuggled in by boat using large oil drums. And this is how they did it. Someone in a small plane, like the kind that was used to smuggle illegal narcotics onto abandoned airstrips, you know what we're talking about, they would pick up the cargo from wherever they were getting the narcotics, be it Colombia, be it Mexico, be it Jamaica, so forth. They'd tag the shipment with a tracking device and fly over the Gulf and dump the shipment into the waters. It's kind of like if you've seen Cocaine Bear, based on a true story, right? But this is how they did that. They would dump it into an area and then for people to go retrieve. All the drugs, this 55-gallon drum of cocaine, it's retrieved by the boat people. They'd haul it in and they'd store it in a nearby warehouse. And from there, most of it was distributed out in mass uncut quantities out to the U.S. through the major freeways. Some, of course, stayed put and was cut and divvied up and given out to the middlemen, then to their sales team, who distributed it locally at the bars and businesses and through the scene in general. You know how the drug game works, right? We speculated from the very beginning that at the center of this cold case was illegal narcotics and that the network of bar owners were involved. But when you discover, going back to the story that I just told you, when you discover who the young woman was who told my dad the story in the first place, things really start to make sense. According to my father, that woman's name is Kristen Abshire. Her mother's name is Donna, who was at one time Donna Abshire. Her father and Donna's ex-husband was none other than James Earl Pudzoe Abshire, the very same crooked constable who I've already told you about, who was indicted for smuggling illegal narcotics back in the 80s. Discovering who she was married to and what was going on regarding the illegal industry makes you wonder, who was she on the phone with during the call that Kristen overheard? Was it her ex-husband, Pudzoe Abshire? Was she perhaps asking him for guidance as to what to do about these 2 dead bodies, all as a way to help out the network that she was either a part of or benefiting from? Was it Pudzoe who suggested they dump the bodies in the spot where they were eventually found in 1987 in his precinct so he could keep an eye out on the investigation? Remember, that's what the sheriff at the time said about him after he was caught smuggling drugs, is that Pudzoe Abshire would show up at crime scenes and he would mess up investigations. Remember, I thought it was odd that their bodies were dumped so willy-nilly with all their identifiable markers, almost like they wanted the women to be identified and they wanted the case to be right there in that jurisdiction. After doing some more digging, though, I realized that she could have been on the phone with someone else altogether. In 1985, Donna had a boyfriend named David Wayne Alexander, who she ended up marrying in 1987, soon after the bodies of Debbie and Sandy were found. Sources say in the mid-'80s, this guy, David Alexander, was a boat guy who had a spot at a local marina off of Bayway Drive, is near a place called Don's Bar, that they say was being surveilled by the DEA. They were keeping an eye on the activity that was going in and out. I couldn't find anything about anyone getting busted there, but still, the information tracks with what we learned from the DEA. We also obtained information that David and Donna both worked for a real estate mogul named Gordon Spear in 1985. It was alleged by these same people that they were known to frequent the bars in Baytown owned by the network, especially Nicky D's, owned by Nick Listy and managed by Dane Listy. And the kicker, of course, is these people were and are close friends with the current sheriff of Chambers County, Brian Hawthorne. And to top it off, Dane Listy, the manager of Nicky D's back then, at the time this all went down, is now an assistant district attorney for Chambers County under a woman named Cheryl Leak Henry. So it's quite a little web we've got going on here, and the story is right in the center of it. That's essentially the end of that story. But it's also just the beginning, because that story kicked off a series of events that have culminated to now. It's a few years after 2018, just 2021. Texas Rangers had the new information, and by chance, soon thereafter, Paul Schaefer, my dad, runs into Candy, Sandy's twin sister, and he asked her, "Hey, have you been contacted by the Texas Rangers about new information about the case? I submitted some stuff to them that I found out." And he tells her about it, and she's like, no one's contacted me. And Dad thought that was weird. So he contacted the Rangers to make sure that they received his package and all the information that he had. And they said that they couldn't find it. They didn't know what he was talking about. It must have gotten lost in transit or something like that. Kind of a big whoopsie daisy there. Like, you just lose things in transit. Okay, so he said, well, I'm going to speak with Texas Ranger Grover Huff. And then he assigned the case to a Texas Ranger named Brandon Bess. So the whole reason this information was sent to the Rangers instead of CCSO, initially at least, is because of possible malfeasance in CCSO. The higher-ups there are connected to people who are possibly connected in some way to this case. We know dirty police officers in Baytown and possibly Chambers are involved in it. So it seemed like the safe bet was to send it to the Rangers. This case needs an objective party, someone outside the county and outside of Baytown looking into it. This has been expressed to them over and over. But it seems it didn't matter. Texas Ranger Brandon Bess is tied in with Chambers County Sheriff's Office. He's close friends with Brian Hawthorne and Cheryl Leak, who is the Chambers County DA. So he released the cold case and all this new information and everything back to CCSO. And they assigned a new officer who then contacted Candy, stating he wanted to meet with them, all regarding this new information. Mind you, this is now 2021, 3 years after the new information was provided. And so there's a meeting with Chambers County Sheriff's Office, with Sheriff Brian Hawthorne there, Sandy Terrell's twin sister Candy, her daughter Tammy, my dad, who was the lead detective on the case back in the day, and Detective Paul Vest, who is the new CCSO investigator. In that meeting, what the story I just told you, all the other things that we've gone over, everything was presented to them. Snout to tail, from the reports then, and the newer information, the outcry witness, all of it. Lots of leads. The meeting lasted over an hour, and when it was all said and done, Hawthorne and Vest said they'd take down all this information and they'd investigate it and they'd call back very soon, so be on the lookout for the call. So, great, here we are. And we waited. And we waited. And Dad contacted them, nothing back. The family called them, nothing back. We waited and we waited. Of course, I get it. Patience is needed. These things take time. I had to remind my impatient dad that these things take time. He knew that too. He was an investigator before. And Candy and Tammy, of course, already understood. They've already been waiting for so long. And so we waited, thinking that things maybe were finally starting to move in the right direction. It's hard. As a storyteller, you kick something up like this and it gets people's hopes up and you feel this great weight of responsibility doing it. And I can only imagine how detectives feel. My gosh, really, like that pressure, those sleepless nights, their minds just constantly stirring with possibilities and the urgency and the anxiety. None of that's lost on me. I totally get it. I get it with what I'm doing now. And this is, decades later. So we waited a while. And finally, after months of waiting, I decided that I was going to, kick the hornet's nest. And I wrote a blog about the long wait. And shortly after I published it, there was a phone call from Detective Vest to Sandy's daughter, Tammy. She called him back, and their conversation, which we have recorded, in that conversation, Detective Paul Vest told Tammy the following. He said that Kristen Abshire denied that a conversation ever happened between her and Paul Schaefer. He said Paul Schaefer was a liar, and he made up the stories altogether. He said they looked into the leads, and all of them were pointless and led to nowhere, and to top it off, my dad was possibly a person of interest because of the interest he showed in the case to this day. Comical, right? Mind you, I was the one, it was me, who wanted to explore this case in the beginning, not him. I had to actually talk him into doing it because he likes success stories, and so he would rather do solved cases than ones that are unsolved. But Detective Vest said all those things, and then he told the family to cease communication with everyone, especially the Schaefers, and only talk to them, and then that was the end of that. This conversation was shared with us, and of course, we have it recorded, and it pissed off my dad, and I think he was mad, but I think he was also hurt, because as being a retired police officer, Detective Vest was a real jerk to him during the meeting as well, and he's like, I don't understand what it is with this detective. He's bad-mouthing me. He was rude to me during the interview when we were in there, and he just disregarded all the information and put zero effort into investigating it. And I can confirm that they didn't. All the people, even down to Bob Bass, were never contacted by law enforcement. I know because I contacted them. The Abshires, both Donna and Kristen, were just telephoned by him, not brought into the station and interviewed in a private room. Things were not done by the book, the way detectives are supposed to do it. Why is that? So, of course, I had to do a little research. I had to do a little digging. And there are actually a few reasons why this happened the way that it happened. And I'm going to start with one. And we're going to take a look at Detective Paul Vest. After digging into him and sharing what I discovered with my dad, it all clicked. His actions, or lack thereof, the fact that he was an asshole since the very beginning, it all stemmed from a vendetta. He had a deep dislike of my father for a very specific reason. A reason that my father, it just clicked. And he's like, oh my God, I know why this guy doesn't like me. It's because of the damn oyster case. And with that comes a story. I know. Here she goes again on a tangent. I promise you it's for a reason, and I'll keep it quick. So here we go. The oyster case. Back in 2014 to 2016, there was a bitter feud over the control of Galveston Bay's oysters. It actually started in 2013 when a man named Ben Nelson, the owner of a seafood house called Jerry's Seafood, and his son-in-law, Precinct 3 Justice of the Peace Tracy Woody, they set up a company called Storm, which stands for Sustainable Texas Oyster Resource Management. What Storm did was they set up a 30-year lease on more than 23,000 acres of land. And then they began issuing trespassing notices to boats that crossed into this territory, depriving the other companies access to their own leases. They also attempted to persuade state legislators to pass a bill authorizing navigation districts to take over Texas Park and Wildlife's authority to regulate oyster beds. The outcome would mean they'd have all that territory to themselves. And, of course, to the victors go the spoils, right? The Chambers County Navigation District allowed this power grab to happen. Let's just say it was probably due to receiving some monetary incentives, and maybe even a little something more. Remember, all I've gone over and what I went over in the last episode, think about it when hearing this. Think about that Pedzo Abshire story. Think about the Rex Cobble and the Cowboy Mafia story, especially. I'm going to talk a little bit about a place called Smith Point. It's an unincorporated community in Chambers County. It's like a little tail that jets out to a point in between Galveston Bay and Trinity Bay. It's almost a halfway point between Point Bolivar and Anahuac, which is all Chambers County. The Bayfront community was identified in 1986 by several houses, summer cottages, oil and gas wells, and small fishing businesses. One of those businesses is Jerry's Seafood Incorporated, that opened in 1970 by this guy, Ben Nelson. In the 1980s, Ben Nelson's son Walter got his first oyster boat and began selling his catch to the family company. That same year, Tracy Woody moved to Smith Point and began working at Jerry's Seafood, and then he married Ben's daughter, Terry, in 1984. Now, it's just known as Jerry's Oysters, but it's still a huge oyster business that's out there. It's a business that sounds familiar, right? I can't help but think about Thompson's Seafood House in High Island that we talked about on the last episode regarding Rex Cobble. So we're still looking at the boating industry, y'all. And I'm just making a little observation there, okay? Because I don't know anything. It's just very convenient. Fast forward to 2013, Ben Nelson and Tracy Woody made that ruthless business move with Storm. And if the business is doing so great, why did they do that? Why would they just do that? It's not just a dick move, it's unethical. So, did they just want the world to be their oyster, pun intended, theirs and theirs alone? Was it all for greed? Or was it territorial? Or both? Maybe they were doing something in that part of the Gulf that needed, some privacy. Food for thought. And of course, I'm sure you have a burning question. What does this all have to do with Paul Vest and his beef with Paul Schaefer in the case? Well, here we go. Let me elaborate. So back in 2014, Paul Schaefer was hired by the owners of Prestige Oyster and Hannah Reef as a private detective. For their case, he discovered that the Chambers/Liberty County's navigation district and 5 commissioners allowed this Storm deal to happen. They held closed-door meetings and brokered the deal in private with Ben Nelson and Tracy Woody. After the oyster companies learned this information, they filed a lawsuit that alleged the district issued the lease for an underwater oyster beds to one company and failed to give the other companies notice or an opportunity to compete. So it's out-and-out favoritism. Paul Schaefer testified in court about these closed-door meetings that he learned about. And in September, State District Judge Lonnie Cox in Galveston invalidated the Navigation District's 23,000-acre lease to Storm, and in State Appellate Court ruled in a separate case that the Navigation District lacks authority to lease oyster beds. So, bye-bye big lucrative deal and private control of 23,000 acres of the Gulf Coast where you would have complete authority to do whatever you wanted. After one of his testimonies, my dad said he was leaving the courthouse, and on his way to his truck, Tracy Woody ran after him, yelling at him, What the hell do you think you're doing? You're a no good son of a bitch and you need to make sure to cover your back. Yada, 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 yada. Safe to say, they mad, girl. They mad. But, of course, what does this have to do with the cold case? Well, check this out. Detective Paul Vest, who in a recorded conversation with Tammy Terrell told her Paul Schaefer was a liar and a crazy person not to be trusted, that his information was a stack of lies, yada, yada, yada. Come to find out, Paul Vest's wife is a woman named Bethany Woody Vest, and her dad is none other than Chambers County Justice of the Peace, co-owner of Jerry's Seafood, and Storm President Tracy Woody. Paul Vest is Tracy Woody's son-in-law. Y'all, it's Chambers County. You can't make this stuff up. So now we don't know why. We don't know why now, because fast forward from that 2021 meeting, all these issues, fast forward 2022, I believe, maybe early 2023, Paul Vest was removed from the cold case. And all we know now is he's currently working security for the school districts. So he was removed and he was replaced on this case. He's one of several investigators who've been assigned and removed from this case. That's one thing. So we kind of started off with like, what is going on with this? Why are these horrible things being said about my dad? Why is the case not getting looked into? Number one is Paul Vest and that whole thing. But also, we need to take a look at Sheriff Brian Hawthorne. In 2022, Hawthorne decided he wanted to get more involved with the case. He called Tammy Terrell out of the blue to speak with her about it. In the conversation, he stated they're doing all they can. She asked about the leads that we provided, and he stated that he personally called the leads. And he is close friends with the Abshire and claimed he believes that they would never be involved in something, quote, like that. He stated the department believes Schaefer made it all up and informed her, reiterating what Vest said, that he was a person of interest in the case. He also informed Tammy that he personally is now the lead detective on the cold case. Tammy then relayed the information from the call to us and claimed it scared her. She said she was scared of Chambers County Sheriff's Office, and she was scared of Hawthorne, and she was scared for my dad, worried that they were going to go after him. Mind you, this has been a lot for her. Her mother was murdered when she was 15 years old. She's a good person. She doesn't want the drama or the BS. She just wants answers. And here's all this crap. There's no reason she should be going through something like this. But here's the thing. Tammy's wise to the way of things. And her worry was completely warranted. And what we didn't know then, what we do know now, is she had every right to worry. Because later on, in December 2023, my very outspoken father was thrown in jail for, quote, criminal mischief. It's a dropped dumb case. I can go into it, and I think I will eventually. He was with some people who CCSO were picking on, and you're going to learn more about those stories later. But they locked him up just overnight. Mind you, my father is 73 years old. Okay? They locked him up without cause. They kept him overnight in a concrete block cell, and they refused to give him the bare necessities required by law, which is water and a blanket. And for those with medical conditions like he has, a mat to lay on. It was freezing in there. It was uncomfortable. He has a bad back, a bad neck. He's had surgeries. He has medical conditions, and he served them for many, many years. And this is what they do, because he tries to solve a case for people that he's come to care about. How can they do this? Well, we know, right? In our neck of the woods, Sheriff Hawthorne and men like him have the power to do whatever they want, however they want, and to whoever they want, especially if you're a person either without a voice and very little influence, in that case you get ignored, or you're a person with a big voice, saying things contrary to their self-serving objectives. And in that case, you get trampled on and put through the ringer. How is that the case? Well, in Texas, people are elected to high up positions in law enforcement. It's all political. In politics, the higher you get, the dirtier the deals get. You guys all know that, right? And the dirtier the connections get, you know the drill. Politicians need campaign donations to win, and sometimes those contributions are from nefarious folks. Like on a small level, Mayor Emmett Hutto received funds from Bobby Jarvis, right, for his mayoral campaign. And on a bigger level, we went over how Governor John Connolly received financial backing from Rex Cobble, who was a big-time drug kingpin. Money, of course, can buy a lot of things, including law enforcement. And of course, the million-dollar question, is Brian Hawthorne one of those who is bought and paid for? Some say yes, some say no. I, of course, decided I needed to talk to him for myself to see what kind of vibe I got and to see how he would respond to questions that I had about the cold case. So I lined it up. He knew exactly who I was, but he totally was cool with me coming in and talking to him. And we had our interview at his office. In attendance was him, Brian Hawthorne, Detective Eric Varme, I'm not sure, Kvarme. And he was the lead detective on the case at the time. He was a really nice guy, cool guy. And he replaced Paul Vest. He eventually left Chambers County Sheriff's Office and now is a captain at Mont Bellevue Police Department. So he was there, I was there, and Amy Dunlap was there. She's the manager of Crude Acts. So here are some highlights of the interview and just some things we talked about. So I asked him about the Kristen Abshire story, of course. He told me that he spoke with Kristen Abshire over the phone. She said to him that she did have a conversation with Paul Schaefer, but the information that he relayed to them wasn't at all correct. He must have been confused by what she told him. Funny, Detective Paul Vest told Tammy that Kristen said the conversation never occurred. So it's interesting now that it did occur, but it wasn't the conversation that Paul Schaefer said happened. Hawthorne said he believes her because he knows the family personally, and he said that they'd never be involved with, quote, something like that. Same thing he said to Tammy. And I asked him, are you sure about that? What about Pudso Abshire? He was involved with one of the biggest drug kingpins in America at the time. Hawthorne just laughed and shrugged it off and said, oh, Pudso, that rascal. He was a good guy. He just made some dumb mistakes. Dumb mistakes are forgetting to, not filling out your paperwork correctly or messing up evidence because you just don't know what you're doing. I make dumb mistakes all the time. But a dumb mistake is not getting tied up with one of the biggest drug kingpins in America. So I don't know about that. Brian Hawthorne went on to talk about the investigation back then. He said that there were a lot of mistakes and that things were not handled properly to today's standards. And he said no one's to blame for that. Things were just different back then and they didn't have the same technology. And of course, that tracks, and I'm sure that's the case. I asked him about evidence, and he kind of skirted the question. I asked him about the Texas Rangers and if they had any evidence, and he told me that they don't keep evidence. And he told me that he had some leads that they were chasing, and he said the leads that were given by my father, they didn't check out, so those didn't work. He did mention there were a lot of cold cases in their neck of the woods, and if I'd like to check those out, I was welcome to, and I could do podcast episodes about those. And that was that. That was the end of it. Now, I interviewed Hawthorne before I got my hands on the interview reports that I've shared with you. So I asked Bob Bass in my interview with him, which was after my interview with Hawthorne. I asked Bob Bass if police had contacted him, and he said that they hadn't. And I also talked with Bobby Jarvis's stepson, and we've had multiple conversations. He's the one who told me about the bloody woman's shoe that was found in Bobby's boat around the time of the murders. I asked him if he'd been reached out to. Nope, he is not. And then I asked the female bartender who had a report and names people in the network. I asked her if she's been contacted. No, she has not been contacted either. Who is he talking about talking to? None of these leads have been followed up on, except for talking to the Abshires where they just said, no, that never happened, and that's it. I get that not a lot of people are alive anymore. Mickey Crawford, Gary Odom, Bobby Jarvis, Jimmy Tippett, Nick Listy. But what about his son, Dane Listy, who managed Nikki D's at the time? Has he been questioned? Or is he safe and off limits because he's now the assistant district attorney of Chambers County? I don't know. What leads have they followed up on? With the exception of that friendly phone call with Kristen, it seems like a big fat goose egg. But of course, remember who took the lead on the case from the very beginning. While Paul Schaefer was the lead detective at Chambers County Sheriff's Office back in the day, it was David Maxwell with the Texas Rangers who was designated as the actual lead because he could file in multiple jurisdictions. In Texas, no other law enforcement agency has that. So the Texas Rangers are the big guys. And for those of you who think the Texas Rangers are just a Major League Baseball team, here's a little info on the Texas Rangers for you. The law enforcement agency, the Texas Rangers, they are mythic. They have been around for a long time. They were founded in 1823 by Stephen F. Austin. The agency, technically, is even older than Texas itself. It has a very complex history. Bloody, brutal, complicated, much like America. They were and are heroes to some and villains to others. Of course, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. I'll let historians debate and sort that all out for you. But what I want to look at with them is how this case and the Texas Rangers go hand in hand. I submitted open records requests to the Texas Rangers a while back, and color me surprised when I received 4 reports from them with information about the case. I took note of all the Rangers who had been assigned the case throughout the years according to those reports. And here I'll list them out really quick and kind of tell you what they did afterwards, after they left the Texas Rangers, that is. There's Jeffrey Cook, 1994 to 2007, he was with the Rangers. Whenever he was with them, he worked a side job or left the agency for a little bit. He worked security to George W. Bush when he ran for president in 2000. So that's Jeffrey Cook. Then there's Chris Clark. He was there 2003 to 2018. He now works corporate security. And there was Adolphus Presley. He was there from 2004 to 2013. He now works for PPI Security under Tony Leal, who is also a former Texas Ranger. He was actually a chief of the Texas Rangers. That's a Houston agency. There's Brandon Bess. He was there 2013 to 2023. Told you a little bit about him already. I heard he retired from the Rangers, and he was actually with Chambers County Sheriff's Office for a little bit. He might still be there, but he also works with PPI Security, along with Adolphus Presley under Tony Leal. And then there's a guy named Robert Smith. No, not from The Cure, just a Texas guy. He was with the Rangers 2004 to 2023. He recently became sheriff of Orange County, and that's deep East Texas, y'all. Then, of course, before all those guys, there was David Maxwell, and he was with the Texas Rangers from 1986 to 2010. He was on that case until those other guys came along. So he worked on it from the very beginning, and in subsequent years, Maxwell, after he left the Texas Rangers, he worked security. Seems like that's kind of what they do. He works security for big money folks in the private sector. He recently made big waves as a whistleblower, calling out Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton for securities fraud. So that is a whole other story, and we will talk about that probably on next season, which is going to be a whole other thing, y'all. But here's some interesting things that I discovered in the reports from the Texas Rangers regarding the case. So one was in 2004. It was a request for Detective Adolphus Presley to return evidence to both CCSO and Baytown Police Department. This evidence consisted of clothing articles recovered at the time and place the bodies were discovered, 1 black high-heeled shoe, 2 blouses, 1 undershirt, and 3 half bras, which is weird. There were also curtains and a piece of wallpaper where the victims were suspected of being killed. All of which was at the Houston DPS crime lab where they store evidence, which is weird because Hawthorne told me that they didn't keep evidence. Well, looks like they do. Anyway, Texas Ranger Presley did what he was told. He delivered the box labeled Curtains to Baytown PD, where it was signed by Detective Brian Thompson, and then he took the clothes and the shoe in the paper sack to Chambers County Sheriff's Office, where Sherry Wilcox signed for them. Why did those go to 2 different agencies? I think that's weird. I don't know. I'm going to have to look into why. At this point, I don't know. I can't answer that. But it does confirm something in Bobby Jarvis's deathbed confession is correct. On the report, it said that they suspected they were killed in a mobile home, and there seems to be evidence to prove it. So then, in Brandon Bess's report, he goes over Maxwell records that ended in 1996, and he stated that all leads had been exhausted. And then he notes that up to 2007, and then on to 2016, so up to, there had been no new leads. But then I got to Texas Ranger Jeffrey Cook's report, and it was written in early 2004, so no new leads up to 2007, but in 2004, there's this. And it proves that Brandon Bess left some important things out. I picked apart that report like I like to do, and I found a name in Jeffrey Cook's report. So I found this name, and then I contacted that person. And so I call. I had to look up the person, look up their number, call the number, hope they still had that number, and so on and so forth. So I called. My heart's racing because, this is a big deal. And when they answered the phone, I asked them the name. This is who I was looking for. They confirmed that it was them and wanted to ask me, how did you get my name and number? And I told them from the Texas Rangers. They said the Texas Rangers gave it to you. I said, well, they gave me a record that an open request form. That's where I found your information. And so then this person just laid it all out. And what they had to say about this cold case just busted things wide open. And of course, corrected our focus and energy because it was all over the place, y'all. Seriously, what this person told me brings back up the past and the connections we've already made. What we've discovered after digging into this information from this person is that back then, the need to cover up this crime goes all the way to the top because of who was involved in it and who they were connected to. That was very powerful and very high up. So that person, what they told me, where they were at the time, all of that stuff, we're going to go over in our next and final episode because we're out of time. I just Ryan Seacrest the shit out of you guys and I'm really happy about it. But this next episode is going to be the final episode in this series, and we're going to tell you what we think happened. We're going to lay out all the theories. We're going to lay out all we learned. We're going to give you this final piece of the puzzle. So, until next time, my name is Jen Schaefer, and this is Crude Acts, Who Killed Debbie and Sandy, episode 9. As my dad used to say, I am too pooped to pop, y'all. This has been quite a journey, and we're almost to the end, and I don't know what's going to happen afterwards. But your support has been instrumental, so thank you very much. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to show us some love, you can subscribe to the podcast with a monthly contribution. It's my birthday month, y'all, so consider it a gift. It can be as low as $36 for the entire year. That's nothing. Y'all know that I know. Y'all spend a lot more in a week on stupid stuff than that. So Anyway, big thank you to Russell Dunlap, my sound guy, and he puts this all together and makes it sound great. And Amy Dunlap, my support system. And of course, y'all know Two Star Symphony is my music makers, that they did the opening song to this. Go check them out. Hopefully they have some live music dates coming up soon, so I'm not sure. I hope so, because they're really fantastic to go see live. Again, I'm Jen Shaver. I research, investigate, write, and host the show. Episode 10 will be out soon enough, and we can put this season to bed. Stay tuned for that grand finale and finally getting those answers. So please take care of yourselves and each other so we can see you next time. All right, bye, y'all.